So an idea of reimagining Hannibal Lecter, to do it for, whether it be television or for another venue. Not another film, definitely. We've done, actually, there have been 5 movies based on Thomas Harris's work. We actually were toying with the idea with MGM, who has the Clarice character from the library of Orion Pictures that did Silence of the Lambs. And we were talking about doing something Clarice and Hannibal in the time period after Silence of the Lambs. But we really didn't take it very far. And in fact, I felt that perhaps Hannibal would be a very, very minor character and then perhaps just disappear. And I didn't feel that was right for the character of Hannibal Lecter. The big question was, where do I go with something that is, for me, a very, very important franchise to the future of my company and also my relationship with Thomas Harris, where I wanted to do it absolutely right and have him be proud. So that's where actually meeting Gaumont International Television, and they were just starting out and wanting to have big franchises. And so it was kind of great timing. And then through Katie O'Connell, heading up Gaumont, and also Christophe Riandi in Paris, France, just everybody was just so excited about the possibility.
Tasteless.
Do you have trouble with taste?
My thoughts are often not tasty.
No, mine.
So then a question of whether I wanted to make this Hannibal different. I don't think necessarily different is the right word. Definitely wanted it cinematic, but done for obviously a different format and for a format of being on television where you have commercial breaks and all these kind of things. But going back to then the genesis of what would it be, that's where Brian Fuller was the genius and the perfect opportunity and ultimate choice.
Reimagining Hannibal actually fell into my lap in a very fortuitous plane ride where I ran into a friend of mine, Katie O'Connell, who'd just become the CEO of Gaumont Television in the US base, and she had just acquired the rights to the Hannibal character.
And Brian said, "What are you doing, Katie? This new company is fantastic." And she says, "Well, we're going to do Hannibal." And he goes, "Oh, fantastic." And then they go sit down, have the flight.
And she asked me, "Do you think there's a television show in Hannibal?" Not to see if I would do it, but what I just thought of the idea of creating a television show around that character.
After the flight, Brian finds Katie and says, "Great idea. I know exactly what you have to do."
My first question was, do you have the rights to Will Graham? Because for me, that felt like the character that was going to be our window into the world, and it was also a character in the book that hadn't been completely translated to any moving image yet.
They're so rich. There's so much information there, particularly about the character, but just the whole world, And I realized that what Brian is doing is really, I think, trying to go back to the books, trying to be faithful to the books, to kind of explore that world and build on it and create new characters, new scenarios, but staying faithful to Thomas Harris's imagination.
In the films, we saw Will Graham as a very stoic, leading man, investigator, and in the book, he's actually much more of a neurotic. And so it felt like there was an opportunity to tell the story of the Will Graham that exists in the literature in a way that you hadn't seen before.
I want him back in the field. And I've told the board I'm recommending a psych eval.
Are we starting now?
The session wouldn't be with me.
Hannibal Lecter's a better fit. Your relationship's not personal. But if you are more comfortable with Dr. Bloom...
No, I'm not going to be comfortable with anybody inside my head.
He loves the way Thomas Harris writes, and he wanted to respect everything that Thomas had done. This is the key thing. So do I. I mean, so does my company. And that was integral, really, in taking forward the canon of Thomas's writing, of his voice.
It also was the opportunity to tell the story of Hannibal Lecter that you hadn't seen before, a chapter of his life that we hadn't explored, which was when he was a practicing psychiatrist and a practicing cannibal. So that felt like arguably the most interesting chapter of the Hannibal Lecter story, yet it had never been told.
Because Hannibal Lecter, as a character, has been established. He's already in the culture of bad guys. He's the #1 bad guy, actually, rated in the world. So we already have that. But also to see him in action is what's so delicious, what he does.
We know the character from before, obviously. We've seen Anthony Hopkins do it to perfection. So we were not trying to copy that. But having said that, The character is the character.
We had seen him post-incarceration, incarceration, and a glimpse of him as a young man, but never actually when he was a practicing psychiatrist. So I felt like this was an opportunity to really get to know the gentleman that we saw creeping down that long hallway in the last cell on the left.
And so he told her, Katie calls me up, says, you've got to meet Brian. I said, fantastic. So Brian meets me, and he tells me exactly what I want to hear, and boom, we go straight ahead, almost day and date, going over to NBC, Universal.
I had been working with NBC on another project at the time, Mockingbird Lane, which was a remake of The Munsters. And I had been in regular conversations with the president of entertainment at NBC, Jen Salke. And I brought up casually over a cocktail that I was developing a Hannibal Lecter series, and her eyes went wide and said that she wants the project.
Content is king. And oftentimes with the material that we have, very dark, and it could be disturbing. You would think it would be great for cable. In fact, it would fit perfectly at cable. But also the networks are starting to wake up. They have to compete with the cable channels, and they have to be edgy, and they have to attract different audiences back to their channels.
And I said, well, would we really be able to do the franchise and the title justice on network television? And she assured me at that time that we will let you do the show that you want to do. So there was this great promise that was kept.
And that's where we were attracted by NBC, because they were willing to take the risk at 10 o'clock at night. It just was almost, the right timing to do something like Hannibal on television. I think they're one of the first, really, to come out and be edgy with things.
He's like Willy Wonka. Every girl he takes is a candy bar, and hidden in amongst all of those candy bars is the one true intended victim, which, if we follow through in our metaphor, is your golden ticket.
So is he warming up for his golden ticket, or just reliving whatever it is he did to her?
Oh, the golden ticket wouldn't be the first taken, and she wouldn't be the last. He would hide how special she was. I mean, I would. Wouldn't you?
And that was always the intention. We wanted Hannibal to be as elegant of a horror show as the character is a human being. We wanted elegant horror. That was our mission.
And then having our writers play with that and to draw out the manipulation, the conflict. So there's just so many things that are opportunity.
Before he was a bit of a lone wolf in his cage. Now we get to see him out in the world, and there is an inherent danger in seeing that beast walking down the street and knowing what he's capable of, but having no idea when he's going to strike. And the great fun is the audience is in on it. The audience knows who he is.
Tell me about your mother.
Some lazy psychiatry, Dr. Lecter. Low-hanging fruit.
I suspect that fruit is on a high branch. Very difficult to reach.
So is my mother. We start, I would say, a couple of years before the events that are described in Red Dragon, which is the first novel. In Red Dragon, without giving too much away for anybody that hasn't read it, Will Graham and Hannibal have already met. They have a whole history, and that history is touched on very briefly in the novel. And what the creators of the show have done kind of brilliantly is extrapolate from that and really imagine an entire backstory, and that's where we begin.
And there's a great stretch of time. He's already practicing as a psychiatrist. He's got a great history of what was behind him from Eastern Europe, traveling to the States, but, not really questioning what made him be who he was. We don't need to answer that. But what was he doing? He was out. He was in the elite of the Society of Baltimore. He was practicing. And he was also the Chesapeake Ripper. And there are things that have been proven through the other books of the different cases that have woven in and out. I mean, such a lore of his background and what he's done, and we can explore that.
One of the great gifts of this series is that we have the books that we are driving toward. So we know, for instance, on our timeline, that Red Dragon is going to be season 4. So we have 3 seasons where nobody knows what's going to happen except for the writers. And then from that point, all of those events that happen over the course of the first 3 seasons will change and alter slightly the events of the books and enhance them in a way. We want to make sure that we are canon to the books. We would love for this to be the definitive Hannibal Lecter story. So we don't want to discard the books, but we want to sort of read between the lines and see where we can, stick in a jack and crank up those words and get in between them and tell a story that nobody has seen before.
Loin, served with a Cumberland sauce of red fruits.
Loin. What kind?
Pork.
Wonderful. I don't get many opportunities to eat home-cooked meals. My wife and I both work. And as hard as I tried not to, I did wind up marrying my mother.
Your mother didn't cook?
She did. She did. I only wish she didn't.
Well, next time, bring your wife. I'd love to have you both for dinner.
We understand Hannibal Lecter as a consumer. He has a great appetite, and he has a very particular appetite. So he enjoys a very specific type of food.
People eating other people has been scaring people since the beginning of days, right? We've got gruesome stories of people doing it out of need, out of ritual, and then we also have people doing it for fun.
Obviously, through the different machinations of the films, it was very apparent that Hannibal was a gourmand. And that comes a lot from Thomas Harris's character, of his own personality as well. He loves food. And obviously what Hannibal Lecter is doing with the different parts, he's eating them, but in a very refined manner.
It's something we can't understand. We can't comprehend it. And the things we can't understand tends to trigger us and make us very curious. And I guess that Hannibal is the icon of all cannibals.
That was a big centerpiece, and that also too is a lot of what an audience wants to see.
And let's face it, we've all occasionally wanted rude people to meet a grisly end, so it answers the kind of slightly, wish fulfillment side of us.
So it was very important that we had the right recipes and have the right look, and it was in the writer's room where Brian just kind of stood up and said, with food, I want it to be food porn.
And for me, the very important thing for this show was to have someone consulting on it who had a greater culinary vocabulary than I do.
Yes, we have hired Jose Andres to prepare the food that Dr. Lecter will be dining on, yes.
I had been a fan of Jose Andres's for the better part of a decade, and always had been looking for an opportunity to how can I work with Jose Andres. And so when Hannibal came across my lap, I thought, this is a perfect opportunity to get to work with somebody who I had been, a fan of for quite some time.
So people are gonna be asking how a chef gets involved in a show like Hannibal. And I don't think I have an answer. But, I opened 4 years ago in Beverly Hills, in Los Angeles. And I opened a restaurant where all of the sudden, anybody who is anybody in the movies, in TV, in Hollywood, began coming to the restaurant.
And I met Jose and I said, I am working on this project that's based on the Hannibal Lecter character. Before I could even ask him if he would be interested in consulting, he volunteered. He was like, I have to be your consultant on this show. He did the teeth-sucking thing, and he said it was one of his favorite characters. He loved that he was a gourmand and had such a specific appeal for the culinary world as well.
My role is simple, culinary advisor. It's a lot of food for a TV show that you could argue is about cannibalism, but it's so much more than that. It's looking into the brain of a person and how food somehow is going to help us trying to understand who Hannibal is.
Not only did the Ripper take his kidney, but he also took his heart, which, if you recall, is what he tried to do in the hotel, but was interrupted before he could paint his picture.
And, I asked Jose, so what can you eat on the human body? And he's like, everything. There is not anything that you can't eat. You can grind the bones into a thickening agent to put into gravy or sauces. You can take eyeballs and emulsify them. You can take lungs of a smoker, and they'll be pre-smoked, and you open them up and you remove the first layer of tar, and then you squeeze the air out of them and you cut them up and you make these fillets of lung.
And I know some of my friends told me, this is sick, Jose. But I want to tell everybody, well, it's not sick. We all cut a finger. And the first reaction we have is bringing that finger to our mouth and having an experience with blood. You just think about it. And you learn that blood is warm, and blood is sweet. And all of a sudden, we have a connection with our own body in ways we don't think.
And he was so enthusiastic and had no kind of preciousness that he was eating people. It was all about how would you prepare meat. And so meat is meat is meat is meat. And he didn't necessarily think that, oh, we have to be delicate. He thought about all of the things that you do to an animal to consume it that you can do to a human being, because we are an animal.
That's kind of my role, trying to help the director and the writers to add another layer through food of who Hannibal is. That's my role. And then trying to bring to life dishes, products, foods, wines that somehow they're gonna be showing in the show in a very subtle way, but nonetheless in an important way.
I feel terrible, Miss Lowndes. Never entered my head you might be a vegetarian. A lapse on my behalf.
So working the food, the menu, the preparation, or the organ of the week into the show starts in the writer's room. What you want to do, and what is so, I think, great about the way Brian and his team structure the episodes, everything is themed, and everything kind of is a metaphor for something else that's going on.
It all starts with a scene. So I'll be in the middle of a scene and I'll email Jose and I'll say, I am writing a scene where Jack Crawford is sitting down with Hannibal Lecter and they have this event hanging over their heads. So we need some sort of dish that can provide a metaphor, for instance, for that dish that can apply to the greater story. So Jose's a storyteller. I think all great chefs are storytellers because the food has to have a beginning and a middle and an end and a crescendo, and that's how he works. And so he's the perfect partner on this show for me because he is also a storyteller.
In my restaurants, I have very creative restaurants, a mini bar, Sam, restaurants that we do 20, 30 courses, where every ingredient, even the music, every smell, the aroma, the looks, everything plays into that sophistication.
It's always got to be tied in. So as they break down what is happening in that series, you know, there's obviously a menu in mind. And that's when Brian will start to talk to Jose with some ideas. And Jose will think and have, I mean, he could cook anything, Jose, in the world, you know, from every single part of an animal, from every single part of the fruit or the vegetable, whatever it is, and make it into something so outrageous, but that's what we're doing too. You know, it's outrageous, audacious.
So imagine how unique it is that I receive an email from Brian with the script. First of all, it's very cool to be able to be reading a script that is alive, is changing as we read it, is never ending a story. And you read the script. I don't only read the page where it's a food scene. I try to read the entire script because I'm trying to understand what's happening, what's going on.
There was an episode where Dr. Chilton, who is a character made famous by Anthony Heald in Silence of the Lambs and Red Dragon, and we got to hire Raul Esparza to play Dr. Chilton in the television series. And so Hannibal Lecter was taking Dr. Chilton to his home and cooking him dinner. So Jose was like, he has to be cooking a tongue.
I don't think I've ever had tongue before.
It was a particularly chatty lamb.
It smells delicious.
The Romans used to
kill flamingos just to eat their tongues.
Don't give me ideas. Your tongue is very feisty. And as this evening has already proven, it's nice to have an old friend for dinner.
So we had goat's tongue, and he gives us the idea of the dish, the aesthetic of the dish, and a recipe for it. And then Janice Poon, who is our food stylist, brings it to life.
I want the food to look delicious. I want it to look menacing but delicious. That's really the key to me. That it would be so alluring that you would, like Hannibal himself, so intriguing that you want to try it even though you know you shouldn't. In the case of lamb tongues, you don't want to try them. They look like overblown larvae. They're really not good-looking things.
Well, one of the wonderful things about working with Janice Poon is that she has an amazing aesthetic, and she also has a very cinematic eye. So she'll think about, oh, we need to have this kind of element in a dish because it'll give you a color pop or a texture. Let's put a little squid in there because it'll give you a graphic design to the dish with the curls of the tentacles. So she's always thinking about what it looks like in a fantastic way.
I made these tongues, false tongues, out of bulgur, which is essentially a wheat mixture, and steamed them all so that I could shape them and curl them so they looked like they were talking to each other and that sort of thing. So what they were eating was actually like a version of Lebanese kibbeh, and what they were saying they were eating was lamb, and what they were supposed to be eating was some unfortunate girl's tongue.
And what's wonderful about the email chains that go back and forth between myself and Janice and Jose are all of these ideas that build on top of each other. We need to put a little salmon roe in there to give it some, you know, a roundness and a graphic pocket that goes next to the main dish. So there are those elements that make it very exciting.
As a creative chef, I've been helping with beautiful Janice, who she's been on the set, main person to make sure that the food looks good. Many of the great ideas are hers.
And what Janice will do is she'll provide an illustration of what the dish is. And then you see the illustration come to life, and the illustration doesn't do the dish the justice that you see when it's finally on camera, because it's gorgeous. Every dish that she's made has been a work of art.
It's a deception within a lie, within falsehood, because what you see on camera, it's neither the recipe that I might receive from Jose, nor is it what Hannibal's telling you. It has to look like what Hannibal is telling you. It isn't. It has to hint at what he's saying it is, but it also has to be something the actors can eat take after take after take, whether they're vegetarians and it's bloody meat stew, or if they are allergic to gluten or any number of things, or simply that there are so many takes that you don't want to give them something that's too spicy or something that is too rich, because they have to eat it take after take after take, and you don't want it to be something that's distracting them or anything that's onerous.
Her comments from the very pure culinary point of view, she speaks to the director has some ideas, then I read the script, I speak with Brian, well on the phone, well through email, Janice, I get all this information, and then I'm like, okay guys, I think we need to be doing this, this and that, we have too little of this.
It's an extra special element, you know, and a wonderfully, you know, sort of twisted way of kind of jazzing this thing up and making it special.
Elements that you would think, like, is this over the top? But it doesn't matter, because it's Hannibal and he is over the top in his aesthetic. So it's wonderful to be working with like-minded people who get that and are able to bring it to the screen. Every story has to have a cinematic point of view. And if we were going to be telling a Hannibal Lecter story, one of the things that was necessary going into this was that we had to have a very specific design element to this show. And if we were talking about a man's descent into madness, we had to communicate that visually. I wanted to make sure, as a fan of sci-fi and fantasy and horror, where we get to leave the bounds of reality and see things that don't exist in our world, I wanted a gateway to be able to have those kinds of images on the show.
It starts with whatever the writers imagine. We'll have a meeting early in the pre-production process where we discuss with the executive producer, Brian Fuller, and with the episode director what they might be looking for and what story they're trying to tell.
With the visual effects, we took the approach of doing as much as we possibly could in camera and then spending time on the things that we couldn't do in camera.
That all starts in pre-production. In a lot of television series, visual effects will have a meeting with the producers and the key creatives, and then special effects and prosthetics will have a different meeting.
On this particular show, we often hold all of our meetings together so that the different areas of effects, practical special effects, prosthetic effects, and visual effects will all meet together and be in the same room with Brian and the director.
We can come up with something where we use a bit of our talents and a bit of their talents and mix them together and come up with a better effect.
We had to find a way, going into the first episode, that we could deliver great-looking imagery that felt real, because here's the thing, if you're doing a thriller, a horror, the moment the bad effect is there, you pull the audience out of that suspension of disbelief. You had them at the edge of their seat and they flip back.
The idea of enhancing the storytelling with visual effects in subtle ways when we need to do something that is just a touch or a flavor of something surreal happening that gives an unsettling feeling for our protagonist, it helps bring the audience into a madness.
Certainly David was very clear in what he wanted to see, and Brian was very clear in what he wrote, so that we had a guideline to begin producing ideas from.
It's always very important with Hannibal, the tableaus of the death scenes. And in doing those tableaus, it's a combination then of the visual effects coming into what has the prosthetics already done.
Will Graham's first exposure to Hannibal Lecter's crime was finding a young woman impaled on a severed stag head being pecked by ravens. And that became his psychic representation of that image, was to see the stag head and the ravens pecking at it and amalgamate those two elements and create this black raven-feathered stag that became this haunting image that plagued Will. And really what that was is this little voice in the back of his head saying, something is strange here, like this is still alive, this is around me, there is an element of horror that I can't escape, and it's pervasive.
The idea of the stag was David Slade's in the first episode, and that has evolved.
He was in the first draft of the script. There was an image that Brian had written that was a dream image, and I liked it a lot, but I knew it was going to be really hard to do it. And we talked about everything. We talked about every way of doing it, from augmenting a real animal to all kinds of things. And in the end, it was a funny little chance reunion I had with a visual effects artist called Sean Broughton, who at the time was at a company called Smoke and Mirrors, and they made this amazing, completely 100% CGI animal. The assets then got passed on to Rocket Science now. So episode 1 and 3, all the animation was done by Smoke and Mirrors. And then after that, the stag that was already built was handed to Rocket Science, and Rocket Science did the great animation for other episodes.
We did a number of shots showing the stag walking away from Will, or kind of looking back at him, sort of leading him to another location, or just sort of taunting him.
We will work with our character animator to produce an initial version which has rough animation, I guess is the best way to put it. It's a first pass. It's produced reasonably crudely. It's almost like a wireframe animation, which we will then show to David and the producer team to get notes on.
All of those shots were basically done by shooting live action plates of Will, and in all cases, instead of using green screen, we would rotoscope Will and place the stag in the shot using 3D tracking, 3D animation and rendering techniques.
And then we'll go through the process of adding the feathers, which is a separate, distinct process, and then rendering at a level which can be reviewed by David and the production team as close to final.
In creating the Raven stag, we go through a process of how many feathers to put on the stag before it becomes goofy. And finding that balance. Whenever you're creating a creature, you have to create it with a certain ominous air because you want it to be powerful and you don't want to give its power away by overdoing it a bit. So we were very careful about how many feathers and where those feathers needed to go on the stag for it to be magical and mythical without becoming a fantasy creature.
I was very nervous for a while until we did some great tests and we became very, very happy with our CGI stag.
One of the things that visual effects does for us is helps us get on the air. So sometimes we film something that may be too much for broadcast television.
You can have people being decapitated, their bodies cut open, but if you show their naked bums, no way.
Coquillas, which was directed by Guillermo Navarro, we had our killer was someone who was making angels out of people, and he would flay them down the middle and spread the flesh out so it looked like angel wings.
That was fine, but they were also nude.
We had this fantastic shot coming into this hotel room where these people had been staged at their desks. Yet we had nudity because their bums were bare and you could see their cracks. So that became unsuitable for broadcast television, and we got a note that we can't show this shot, which was this beautiful cinematic shot. And I was like, we have to show this shot. It's gorgeous. It's a money shot. That's our show.
We ended up covering their backsides with blood.
And I was like, what if we filled that butt crack with blood so you actually couldn't see that there was a crevice? And they said that would work. And so Rocket Science came in and they carried the blood down over the butt crack and filled it up so you didn't actually see a crevice, and we were able to broadcast.
There's no accounting for that kind of taste, I suppose. But hey, it fed into the look of the show, and the imagery was actually, despite sounding really disgusting, kind of beautiful.
This is my gift to you.
Our minds, which are the most sophisticated virtual reality system known to man, is the way to communicate a man's descent. And Will Graham's story in the first season is about his descent into madness. So we needed a cinematic vocabulary to communicate that.
Months of thinking and planning went into Will Graham's decriminalization process. How things would disappear from scenes.
That effect was initially described as a pendulum in Will Graham's mind. It was not sort of fully established when we began production on episode 2. It was still being worked on the pilot.
We worked together with Smoke and Mirrors to develop the pendulum effect for reversing time. And then we worked out how we would do some of the specific moments.
So in each case, we tried to figure out what shots of a particular crime scene could be presented as a time rewind.
The way we did it is lots of different ways, but all meticulously planned, well in advance. Lots of meetings with special effects.
So the moments that we worked out for the pilot often involve reverse high-speed photography, blood spraying against a wall and then reversing backwards, or stepping through the moments of the murder scene from Will's POV, but doing some of them in reverse or with a creative visual treatment.
Most of that stuff is done in camera and then cleaned up digitally, but the process of approaching it was something that was heavily tested. So, we had a thing called a dingus. The dingus was a 1 foot kinoflow, which would be swung over the back of the camera so that the light that's going to be there, and it's not going to be there when we see it, but it's going to be there digitally later, is actually reflecting light into the room. Something that has to be thought about, something has to be planned, something has to be built, it has to be tested, it has to be shot.
So in episode 2, we set a camera up over the Grizzly Mushroom Field crime scene, and we started removing bits and pieces progressively. We had the actors start in the shot and then leave, and then we started removing mushrooms and emptying the grave of the guy in the foreground. That gave us enough pieces to create this time rewind effect where the mushroom field changed over time during the pendulum effect. We enhanced that with some CG mushrooms as well.
It's a lot of stuff, and it's, you know, and it grows and it changes, but the one thing I can say about that stuff is it's a lot of planning, really. The bit where you're doing it is never the kind of bit where you're worried, and that's the kind of like, okay, now it's quite methodical.
One of the wonderful things about working with the visual effects team is that they can augment our production value in a relatively cost-effective way that gives us things that don't exist. So for instance, in the Baltimore State Hospital for the Criminally Insane, we have a relatively modest building, but we need it to look like an institution.
Creating environments or altering environments is a very common visual effects technique in general. It's something we do all the time for lots of shows. We shot an existing building in Toronto. Just the front part of the shot is a real building. The entire back structure is a visual effects matte painting.
So they enhance that little building into a large kind of behemoth building that has an oppressive quality to it. That is where the criminally insane are stored to protect society.
That was challenging because a lot of the exterior shots that were done, a lot of the establishing shots that were done for Hannibal were shot time-lapse, basically with a still camera that took, you know, images over several hours where the light is constantly changing. The sun might be going in and out of clouds, the sun's moving across the sky over the course of the shot. And it was a challenge to replicate that lighting on a matte painting.
But again, you know, it's constant dialogue with rocket science, talking about how we always discuss how we're going to do all the visual effects shots. I generally have a very clear idea of how I'm going to do a shot, and I discuss it with them, make sure they're okay with it, and then they get all the things that they need, and then we go and we do it in a way that can be expedited for television.
We're very dedicated to doing a quality production, and so it's vital for us to not put anything on screen that we can't defend.
You know, it's funny when you think that it's a heavy visual effects show, it's like you don't think it is, because everything is pretty seamless.
Visual effects has always been a fascinating part of any filmmaking process for me. You know, going back to classic science fiction films, the process of delivering an image to an audience that does not exist in reality is fascinating because we're giving them something that they can't ever see without sitting in front of their television or going to a film.
We, in the 5 films that were made, had such wonderful filmmakers. And with those filmmakers, each had a particular musical choice, which made everything even more, you know, rich and signature.
We wanted our score for Hannibal to be a much more psychological sound than a melodic sound. And David Slade had worked with Brian Reitzell before and was very passionate about working with him again on this project.
So I worked with Brian Reitzell on a film called 30 Days of Night, which was a feature film. And I've worked with him since on other projects, and he seemed like the perfect person to work with for Hannibal because we had done a lot of experimenting in the arena of sound scoring in films, and there was no reason why we couldn't do it for television.
Sonically, we just did our own thing with Hannibal. I just approached it, you know, with what I thought it should sound like.
And when I sat down with Brian to talk about what was the soundscape that we were going to be creating for this show and how it needed to be signature, we talked a lot about tone as opposed to melody. We wanted it to be very psychological.
This is my design.
David and I aren't big fans of typical sound effects and sound design, so most of that stuff was done with the music.
We are scoring the underlying horror. The sound is often based on an idea. It's very subjective. There's a very tonal and atonal underscoring.
In a music spotting session where I sat down with the composer, in this case Brian Reitzel, we would have very unexpected conversations about music, where I would say, in this scene, I want the feeling as though Will Graham is in a bathtub and the water is just the back of his ears and we hear a simmering sound, so we were inside his body and not necessarily external. We wanted all the sounds to have an internal quality.
Brian Fuller had mentioned several times that he wanted to be cocooned by the music. And when we were working on the score, you know, the music is like the wallpaper. I mean, it's part of the room. It's in the air. It's the atmosphere. It is a thing. And we are going to go from one room into another room. The music is going to go right there with you. It's going to change and evolve with you. I like the music to feel alive.
And I love Brian's music, and we were very lucky that Brian said yes right away to doing all the episodes. I mean, you think, okay, the pilot, you put everything forward in the pilot, you pull out all the stops. But he wanted to do everything. And besides doing the music, he also wanted to incorporate and be part of the sound.
The general process of television spotting is very different as a result. Usually spotting on TV is, you know, you go in and say, oh, we could do with a bit of music here, you know, we could do with this here, and we could do with that here. Well, with Brian, the area of sound design, which is usually a different department, and music, which is usually a different department, and even sometimes music supervision, which is another different department. It's all kind of, Brian's kind of doing it all. We do have sound designers who do specific bits of sound design for us, but generally that gets worked into the music and all happens in the sound mix.
You know, and I don't like to read the script. I want to be sort of surprised a little bit and get that gut reaction. That's what I like about horror music, because horror music is unnerving, and the music is meant to sort of scare you and it's meant to, you know, make you feel the suspense and the darkness and the grief and all that stuff that's in the air. And so, you know, for us, all that sonic environment, you know, you can do all that with music. You don't need to have a giant thundercloud from a sound effect.
You know, I'll talk to him about things which are completely abstract, and he'll find some ancient musical instrument that embodies the idea perfectly.
I think that the show is an alternate sort of reality, and you can play around with the sounds of reality and invent new ones. If you're hearing something new, you don't really have baggage or connection with it. You just have this, you know, you're more in the moment. If you're recognizing things, even like there's an acoustic guitar or there, you know, whatever, your brain has got connections to it. And so I try to mask much of the tonality and the timbre of the instruments and things in such a way that it just sounds like something unique.
So Brian is also a storyteller, as any composer is. And one of my favorite instruments that he used on the show in an unexpected fashion was the bull roar, which is one of the oldest instruments known. And it's essentially this wood sort of board and a string, and you spin it over your head and it creates this very disturbing guttural primal sound. And he used that to score the stag and the man stag in the season finale.
You catch these killers by getting into their heads. But you also allow them.
Take me to Minnesota. I want to see where Abigail died.
With Will, he's gradually kind of losing his mind. He's losing his sense of reality. By the last episode, once he wakes up from his nightmare, he's still in it. So musically, you'll see the arc of the season gets more and more surround. So if you're listening to your Blu-ray especially, you'll get a lot of dimension, and as the arc of the show gets from the first episode to the last, it's literally spinning out of control in the last episode. Literally, you're in this vortex. We recorded in a quadraphonic way with a thing called a bull roar, and I spun it around, and so when you're watching it, that instrument is literally spinning around your head. It's fun.
It's a lot of hard work from Brian Reitzel, a lot of hard work from people working in the sound mix. It is also, it's defining our show in the way it is very different in almost every area.
But it could easily just, become too much, or it could be rote, but Brian's none of that. And so we're very lucky that he's also a wonderful composer. At the end of the first episode, a wonderful scene with Will and Hannibal over the bed of Abigail Hobbs, and a beautiful song, which really is then the theme song, almost, not that we have a theme song for Hannibal, but it's those themes that are played and woven in and out, which is always integral in any show or any film.
And we are just pushing the envelope as far as we possibly can with Hannibal, because there are such great opportunities to do music that you feel rather than hear. And that's the goal. Again, it's part of the making a little horror movie every week.
I really like for each thing to have its own sound, and sometimes it's very little, very minimal. It could be just one instrument that you hear. It's a fine line between indie. You do that, you never want it to sound indie. Even if you're working on an indie movie, I hate when it sounds like, the Sundance Channel or something. Nothing against the Sundance Channel. I like the Sundance Channel, but the sort of plaintive acoustic guitar or whatever it is it's not very elegant. I think it's important to be elegant and to do stuff that will be timeless and always be cool.
Very early on in the history of cinema, all you had was an actor's face and music. You didn't have dialogue to tell you what to feel. And we're very much along those lines of the value of film and music as a partnership that tells us what a story is, and even with the absence of music, it can tell you how to feel. So music is something that is always going to be a part of cinema for me. I've been collecting soundtracks since I was 5. So I love film scores, and I love working with composers. It's one of my favorite parts of a production. And working with Brian Reitzel has been such a wonderful experience, because he thinks about music in a way that I have never been exposed to before. And he is a true craftsman.